Hi there, everyone. Welcome. So we'd like to welcome you guys to lawsuits and damn lawsuits. Seriously, our talk today that we're going to go into is going to be talking about endpoint security, talking about our experience and kind of our story, as it pertains to our journey with testing a number of different solutions. We do need to make a disclaimer here. Just really quickly, when it comes to the actual discussion today, there is nothing proprietary within this that you can't do yourself. There's nothing that we had special that we used. There was no, special assistance from a vendor other than having them configure their particular device. Additionally, everything that we've done today, we basically did in outside hours, and and these are our opinions and not our employers. So, all right. So, real quickly here, as mentioned earlier, my name is Mike Spaulding. I've been in information security for over 20 years. I've actually been in information security way too long. I am a Navy brat. I grew up around the world. Grew up a little bit towards the end in Ohio and still live in Ohio. I'm more of a bourbon guy. Probably compliments of DerbyCon, and I'll let Lidia introduce herself.
Hi, thanks Mike. I'm Lidia Giuliano. I've been doing information security for the past 15 years. I originally got into InfoSec because I was a keen shell scripter, and I just absolutely loved playing with regular expressions and seeing how far I could go. As you can hear, I'm Australian, and for the American audience here, despite what anyone may think, we do not drink Fosters. That's all I'm going to say about that.
All right, so really what's going to happen today, we're going to kind of go into our story because we have our own story of how we kind of arrived at this podium today. We're going to get into what we call the lies and the truths, and we're then going to go into the framework that Lidia more or less designed and she pretty much wrote. We're going to go through that. The biggest thing that we want to emphasize on here is that at the end, we want everyone to take away from this a general idea of how you can go about testing on your own. Our frustration from this really kind of came about with our particular story. And our story started when we had a security manager come back and essentially said, I have this great idea. I went to this vendor conference and they told me I needed to buy this. So we started out with this whole, I've got to go ahead and buy this new software to, okay, first of all, why should we buy it? Now, he did have a point. At the time, we were suffering roughly one major ransomware outbreak a month. It was impacting business. Things weren't good. In particular, where we were leading up to is that we were having problems with our file servers, and in particular, print servers. Getting ransomware and essentially stopping the business from being able to print. And when you're doing certain functionalities, especially in a legal world, you have to be able to print. So in the end, what did we really want to achieve with this? We wanted to be able to go into this purchase with some bit of idea of what we wanted for stopping the ransomware. But ultimately, we got into the, is it next gen AV? Is it EER? What is it that we're going after? So just to kind of go into a little bit of the technical details, and Lydia's going to go into the first demo. We had a vendor say, we got this great idea. What we'd like you to do, and again, we had no budget for this, so this was kind of an out of cycle type of purchase. They said, we would like you to go ahead and install, our XYZ product and put it on your file servers and print servers. So then that way you'll be protected. And the first thing we did is essentially look at each other and we said, well, wait a second, that doesn't make much sense. If the end user clicks on the malware, right, because they get phished and they click on anything, if they click on that malware, that's going to encrypt the file share, right? They said, no, that's not how it works. They said, at the end of the day, we've got this magic sauce that's going to take care of it. And I'm being facetious, but that's essentially how it was portrayed to us. So then we went to the next vendor and the next vendor. We said, hey, is this how your stuff works? And they all are basically, nodding their heads up and down, going, yeah, that's exactly how it works. Finally, Lidia and I reached out to Dave Kennedy, and we started asking him. We're like, Dave, you fish people every day. If you do this, what's going to happen? He goes, no, that's not how it works. I don't think that's how it's going to go down at all. So we decided to go ahead and run a demo, and I'll let Lidia kind of take on that.
Not running the demo, yeah. So the point of this is that every single vendor that we spoke to said, yeah, absolutely, put this agent wherever you think it's necessary. And at the end of the day, deployment is key. So once Mike starts running this, the point to take away with this is that just because you put it on a file share does not mean that you're going to be protected, especially in the case of ransomware where it inherently is literally just a network call. Let's just wait and see and watch what happens.
It's not coming up. Of course, it worked yesterday in the other room.
Sorry.
I think I need to minimize the PowerPoint. Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah. Of course, the demo gods, they speak.
Still not.
Hold on.
I think we're good. Nope.
All right, let's get back to this. Let's do the...
Nope. Go full screen.
It won't get any bigger. Go ahead.
Won't get any bigger. All right. Apologies for the size. So what you're seeing here is.
Sorry, I restarted it.
That's okay. No worries. So again, for our first demo, I wanted to just dispel the myth of the deployment of endpoint protection. So what you're seeing here is that I've got two separate servers. That one there is the file share, and you can see that you've got clean files there. And right there, I'm actually just showing you the file server. Here's all my files. Everything's good. Life is good. Come over to, effectively this is your patient 0. Here's my files. Life is good again. And then in a minute, I'm about to detonate the malware. So here's the malware. It's running. I'm going to jump over to Process Hacker in a minute. You can see that the process is running. You can see it highlighted in yellow there at the top, and then I jump over to the network tab, and you can see the C2 call being made out. So you can actually, the keys being downloaded. And what you see here is your network file share, and everything, boom, is encrypted. So the first lie that I want to talk to everybody about is deployment is absolutely key, especially we know ransomware is a huge problem. So it's really, really important to consider exactly where you're going to place your agents, because depending on the way the malware runs, you need to protect your endpoints in different manners and different modes. So again, everything goes back to the way that you test. So that's the first one. Mike, let's move over to the next slide.
Yep.
So what do we want to do today? I obviously want to provide you a really quick overview of what endpoint protection is. I want to talk to you about how we did the POC. But more importantly, one of the things that I noticed going into this is that there was absolutely nothing for Mike and I to do this. And back when I first started doing this, especially around the February timeframe, the RSA conference had hit. NSS Labs had produced their reports, and they had executed something like 12 pieces of malware. And I'm like, holy cow, there's got to be more to this than 12 pieces. And not only that, I had to pay $700 to get the report, and I thought, this is nuts. So what I did was, in my spare time, I started writing a framework, and this is what I want to do for everybody today. So at the end of this talk, I want you to be able to go away with the questions that you need to go and ask the vendors about their solution, number 1. And 2, I want you to be able to walk away with how you can do it yourself. So anything that you see here that you like, you're interested in, whatever, I'm going to have my email down at the end, write it down, and then you can ask me any questions that you like. So again, this is just a real high-level summary of what the different components are regarding endpoint solution products. Some people know, some people don't know, so I just want to give a quick overview. The market is saturated. There's so much out there. How do you even know where to start? So you got your traditional AV. We know that it's all signature-based. Who cares? It's dying. Then you move over to the next generation stuff and you'll hear machine learning, artificial intelligence, neural networks. I mean, who cares, right? They're meant to do all these fabulous magical things. Some of them work in the cloud, some of them don't. But at the end of the day, the next generation AV stuff is meant to be replacing the traditional stuff. It is meant to be more intelligent. And we saw some really good results and we saw some, so-so results. Then for the EDR stuff, this stuff is really important if you are a mature network, if you have got a really good functioning SOC, you've got a triage team, and you want to actually have a look at what's going on. So the hunting, drilling down to processes, some vendors have process trees, 3D visualization, some of them got like a Twitter feed, they've all got good stuff going on. You can contain, you can do good IR stuff. And then in addition to that, you've got other components like application whitelisting, you can do remediation, all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're seeing all of these companies all converging. And so as you start talking to these vendors and asking them about these solutions, you will see a slice of every single one of these components. For you personally, you need to understand what's the business problem, what are you trying to solve? Click the first one. Yep. So what I'm showing you here is some of the slogans that I saw. So my boss come and said to me, we've got to get an endpoint protection solution. It's got machine learning. And what do you want me to do about it? I don't really care what machine learning is. But I do, but I'll go back to that later. So these are some of the slogans that I saw, and what you're seeing is the observations that I made. So some of you'll see slogans like, we do real-time APT protection. All right, so APT, we all know, Advanced Persistent Threat. What is that? People go, oh, state government stuff, people in Korea, wow. Some of these vendors, after I wrote my framework, I said to them, great, you do APT protection. Do you do any memory-based analysis? No. Oh, okay, so they didn't want me to test their product. So it's really important that you ask the right question. Memory-based protection, which I'll talk about later when we talk about attack scenarios, is really important. You've got to ask the question. Some of them don't do memory-based analysis. Another vendor or another slogan that I saw is, we've got a multi-layered approach. Right, so what happens when I turn one of those layers off? Boom, you're dead. I saw that as well. So you might think that a multi-layer approach is good. Well, let me give you the scenario where you've got a business unit who've got critical assets, you've got your classic AV installed in it, and they've said, no, the background scanning's killing my functionality, you've got to turn the background scan off. That's what I'm talking about. So you turn it off, it's gone. Some of the other vendors turn around and say, hey, we're the leader in cloud endpoint security. Well, I've got roaming users that cannot connect to the internet. How are you going to protect me? You can't, because you can't make that cloud call. And so we saw a huge loss in the effectiveness when there were some vendors that really rely on that cloud. And then you've got other vendors that say, we're a complete AV replacement. What the heck does that even mean? Okay, there is no governing body, there's no regulatory board that does say, this is what an AV product looks like. So the reason this is important is, for you need to figure it out. If you're regulated by SOX, or you've got to follow PCI DSS or anything like that, where it says you must do background scanning or you must do on-write scanning or whatever. If you're looking at an EDR product, which some of them are great, by the way, I'm not saying they're not, but if you have a requirement to do that dormant background scanning, well then it's not a complete AV replacement for you, depending on your business requirements. You're going to have to augment. So for anybody that knows me, I'm a huge fan of Paul's Security Weekly, and anything that I always say always comes back to, what problem are you trying to solve? So when I asked my boss that question, what problem are you trying to solve? He always said to me, Lidia, we're trying to solve ransomware. I said, no, we are not. Don't tell me that you're trying to solve ransomware. Don't tell me that you're trying to solve insider threat. Don't tell me that it's this, that, and the other. For most of us that don't work in government, and I'm not directing this at government organisations, but most of us that work in the private sector, we are trying to reduce the incidents. We're trying to reduce the cost. Every time that there's a ransomware or some sort of malware attack, I am on IR calls for 2 or 3 or 4 days at a time for 8 hours just sitting there. And there's 10, 15 people on these calls. That costs so much money. So you're talking about people costs, you're talking about reputation. How many people got hit with WannaCry and it's still bouncing around your environment? You're still trying to clean up, you still patch. Many of us are still fighting with that stuff. So at the end of the day, we're trying to keep our business running. That's what the business problem is that you're trying to solve, not ransomware, not malware. So one of the things that Mike and I are going to come back to is the defence in depth discussion. So this is the strategy that I put together, and all the files and all the things that I put together, again, reach out to me if you're curious and you want to see how I did it. So from October to December, I researched and researched and researched, and basically what I did was I put together roughly 100 functional, non-functional requirements, and the strategy for me was testing on as many different flavour OSs as possible. There's no point saying we're just going to test on Windows 10. How many of you in your companies are still running 98, 95, heaven forbid DOS, right? Perhaps 2002. It's probably out there, so you need to consider those operating systems. And then you also need to look at the different profiles. So when you log into your typically Windows machine at work, how many of you all just have a standard profile? It's pretty rare, and I've worked in one organisation where I've had different profiles depending on the user. Most of us just got a standard user, and then you may have a development user if you're lucky and an admin user. So you need to test those. And then you need to test turning that cloud off, turning that cloud on. I promise you, you will see a completely different detonation sequence when you turn that functionality off. And then this is what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of slides, the different ways that I tested and the documentation. So basically, I spent 9 months of my time doing this, and what I'm presenting to you today literally is 10% of what's in here. Some of the other caveats that you need to actually be aware of. Are you looking for a 100% SaaS solution? And if so, why? Or are you looking for a hybrid? Or is the current solution that you're using today, and for example, you might be using McAfee today, and then you might test Symantec as an example, and you go, well, Symantec's actually pretty good, but none of them really offer cloud today. And I'm sure they're moving to it, but is it really worth ripping out a McAfee for a Symantec? So you need to look at that return of investment as well, especially if they're new products, might be doing a half-decent job. The other thing that you might want to consider is, do you need AD? Do you need AD integration? May or may not. How many users do you need to log onto the console? The other thing that was really interesting to me was, again, let's go back to those legacy OSs. Some of these agents, when you install them, you must reboot your machine. How many of you are not allowed to reboot your machine? You need to take that into consideration as well. And also the other thing that I was mentioning before, take into consideration your legacy applications. Some of these agents I could not install on old operating systems. It was impossible. And when I had one CPU versus maybe 1 or 2 gigs of memory, I could not install. Some of them needed a .NET framework. Some of them need mandatory packages. Some of them need mandatory service packs. You need to take that in consideration, otherwise it will not work. Let's move on to the environment. So when we did our testing, environment is so important. We had a couple of vendors that said to us, just test it in production. If I tested in production, that would have been a serious career limiting move, number one. But my advice to you is, if you want to install it in production and just let it run in some sort of monitor mode, fine, but don't run any malware. You'll do yourself a big injustice. Some vendors will say to you, hey, Lydia, you want to do some malware analysis or whatever? I've got a cloud. Use my cloud. It sounds alluring, doesn't it? Because it's easy. It's convenient. Don't do it. Don't do it, because they control the whole environment. There's absolutely no worries letting them set up the environment in terms of the SaaS console. Let them set up the prevention policies, no problems. But you need to set up your own environment for doing the pre-execution and the detonation and the attack sequence. And this is really important. We did it in AWS, but I also did it in VirtualBox. I also did it in KVM. You could do it in parallel. You could do it in vSphere. You could do it in VMware. You could do it in any virtualization platform you want. But the point is, don't just stick to something like VirtualBox. And the reason I talk about that is, if you ever reverse engineer a piece of malware, most of those codes, they're just regurgitated, and they're looking for something like, oh, I'm running it in VirtualBox, so I'm not going to detonate. When you start running it in something like AWS or KVM or something like that, again, your results will be different, I promise you. You want to talk to this?
All right. So one of the big questions here is where to source. Right off the top, our recommendation is going to be you shouldn't really take any malware, or at least malware available from the vendors. Here's why. There has been some recent drama associated with vendors, supposedly again dropping in fictitious malware that wasn't really malware. But at the end of the day, what it really gets back to here is you want to be able to go to a variety of different sources. You want to be able to go and grab just some really funky stuff. You want to go after a whole slew of things, whether it's ransomware or Mimikatz or whatever it is you want to try out. Go grab that stuff and go test it. The more that you have, the more that you can actually go back and look at and reflect on your results. Testing it with 12, like in some cases, like 12 pieces of malware, that's not testing. That's just kind of going through the motions. The other thing that we also want to talk about is file types. So from a file type standpoint, binaries are very convenient. However, in the real world, are we going to go ahead and fish people with EXEs? Probably not. We're not going to go out. We're not going to essentially, we always tell our users don't click on this, or we're probably going to be blocking, a .zip file or whatever. A good example is people will click on those .hta files that you have from Microsoft for help. So you want to go grab this whole variety of file types. You don't want to stick to just one type of file type. In the end, you're going to ultimately want to mutate all this, and by mutating it, what you're going to arrive at is you're going to be able to hopefully defeat signatures, which is really where we're getting at. The result, when we think about ransomware, we think about the bad guys these days. They're mutating everything. If we're counting on signatures to carry us, it's not going to carry us much longer. So that's where the machine learning, the AI comes in, and when we think about mutation, we start thinking about how we're going to manipulate these files in order to bypass those security controls. And that's really where Lidia kind of takes off here.
So let's evaluate the first capability. This is one of the first things that I tested, pre-execution. Now, this might not be everybody's cup of tea, and again, it depends what your business case is. If you're interested in an EDR solution, this will be irrelevant to you, so you could probably go to sleep for 5 minutes. Where you are looking at an AV replacement and you have got a business requirement to make sure that you want to check your dormant files. I mean, businesses have been there for years. You've got file shares that have got files that have been on there for 10, 15, years and years and years and years. So you may definitely be interested in the dormant file scanning capability, and also the on-write scanning. So when we talk about on-write, we're talking about not detonation. This has got nothing to do with detonation. It is the introduction of a file. So that might be insertion of a USB stick, it might be downloading a file, it might be saving as an attachment, but not opening anything up. And that's what this test scenario is. And again, as Mike said, in this scenario, I had about 20,000 pieces, and not just binary files. I had scripts, I had I had compressed files, jar files, zip files, you name it. I tried to make a variety. And also, when I tested this, network connection off, network connection on. This is one of the sample sheets that I used. So again, if anyone wants a copy of this, just reach out to me. So when I did my testing, I was extremely thorough. And the reason I was extremely thorough is because when I had a debrief with all my vendors, to be honest, I got attacked. That was like, oh my God, what have you done? Okay, when I showed them my results and I showed them my screen snapshots of everything that I'd done, they could see the science behind what I did. So this is the framework that I want to give to you guys, because this is going to help you score and effectively get to where you need to in terms of meeting your business requirements. So if pre-execution is something that you need to do, these are some of the things that you will be interested in testing. Maybe there's more. If there's more, let me know. Let's expand it. Let's give back to the community, because that's what this is about. So you talk about scanning dormant files, you've got that section there, you've got the on-write, etc., etc. So I talked about external drives, download, etc., etc. And then here on the left, this is all your malware. So you're seeing sample set A. I had about 15 sample sets going down, and not just original pieces, mutated pieces, double mutated pieces, triple mutated pieces. Mike. So what I'm showing you here is some of the results. And so you've got about 20,000 pieces here. These are the original samples. Now this is really important because the next slide I'm going to show you is mutated samples. Now they all look pretty good, right? And some of you are probably looking at E and you're thinking, what the heck, right? E's not a big deal. E is an EDR product, all right? Their functionality is not to do pre-execution testing. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with E. And remember, we are not doing any detonation here at all. We're just checking to see if any of the files that are living on our file systems are bad. So this is pretty good. You're talking about a 70% hit rate. However, when we mutated, it changes. It changes a lot. Okay, so you've got some of your traditional AV products, which are B and D. They didn't do so well when we started mutating, okay? And some of your other newer ones, A and C, did a much better job. Now let's talk about scripts. All the new ones didn't pick up scripts. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, gee, that's not good, okay? But let me talk about why D and B, which are your older traditional AV solutions, picked them up, because they did sandboxing. So they're kind of cheating a little bit. What they're doing is they're getting the file and they're detonating it at the same time. So they're not actually checking that particular file to see if there's anything instinctively that makes that bad. Okay, so they've got the file, they're checking it and they're mutating it. So and they're detonating it. So they're kind of cheating a little bit. So that's why you're seeing some good results there. Move on. So what are some of the hype bits with the pre-execution stuff? One of my pain points during pre-execution was sandboxing. Some of the older style vendors are sandboxing every single piece of unknown malware that it doesn't know, and it's reaching out to the cloud to try to figure out if this is malware. The impact that I saw on the CPU when we did this was incredible. I saw a huge reduction, and the box really slowed down. Especially when some vendors said to me, you can run our product on anything. And I did run it on anything. I ran it on one CPU, 1 gig of memory, and that thing was just dying. Again, the cloud solutions. When I was trying to do this in the cloud environment, the effectiveness dropped so much. And then when the cloud is on, again, you really saw a delay in quarantining and killing those processes. So the key takeaways for me with this was that if this is something that is important to you and you want to get that complete AV replacement, this might be a requirement. If you need to do a complete AV replacement, make sure that it does do this pre-execution scanning. And just beware of sandboxing, because it really does slow it down. The next capability that I tested was pure detonation. So this is actually executing the malware, and this is where the fun actually happened. There were 2 scenarios that I executed. One was turning the pre-execution capability off, and then the next one, which is when I turned everything on, because we wanted to see what the vendors could do to the max. So what we're seeing in this scenario is pre-execution off, and then again just detonating the malware and seeing what was going on. You've got your original files, you've got your mutated files, you've got the scripts, and where I've got the static malware, when I executed these scripts, I just didn't point and click. I ran it through batch scripts, I ran it through PowerShell scripts, I ran it through as many different obfuscation techniques as I could just to see what the difference was. Again, just another scoring spreadsheet, so again, happy to provide this. If you were testing bulk malware, then I would suggest you go for method A. So what you're looking at is you want to see how much get quarantined versus how much gets killed and stopped versus how much actually runs. And then if you're looking more from an EDR solution, you want to split that last one in terms of how much is running and gets detected versus how much is running and not detected. Because that's a really important statistic. Because if you've got an EDR for detection and it's not detecting your malware, you have a problem. So,
go ahead, keep talking.
Yep. So I've basically got two detonation scenarios for you, and one is a good example and one is a bad example. So what you see in this example is I've got 100 pieces of malware and I have mutated them twice. And what you can see here is that I'm just executing it through a batch script because I'm just too lazy to point and click on 100 pieces, and I'm running them sequentially. And as they run, it runs as it's expected. It quarantines, it kills, and nothing gets infected. This is actually a really good scenario, and this is what I would expect from my solution if I turn off the pre-execution control. You could probably skip down to the end if you want with this mic.
Yep.
So this is a really good scenario. When it gets to the end, it's killed, it's quarantined, and nothing gets infected. Okay, versus running it through PowerShell. So in this particular example, I'm running the same 100 pieces of double mutated malware through a PowerShell script. Oh, well, let's wait for the PowerShell script to come up. Now you can see my PowerShell script's pretty boring. There's nothing fancy about it, it's just a for loop, okay? But what happens when I run it? And when I eventually click on the process hacker, there we go. Every single piece is now executing. I haven't done anything. I haven't obfuscated it. I haven't done anything, I haven't done any Daniel Bohannon magic in this particular piece. I've literally just run it a for loop through PowerShell script, and boom, I've DOSed the box in 2 seconds. Same malware, different technique. Go to the next one.
Waiting for it to catch.
Go to the next one.
I know, it's slowly.
Oh,
It's
okay.
coming alive. There you go.
Okay. So the next one is, before, what I've done is we've done pure detonation, so I've turned off all the pre-execution controls. Now, you want to give your solution the benefit of the doubt, and you want to turn everything on. So this is turning everything on. So in this case, again, I did the same samples as I did in the pure detonation. I'm running it through batch scripts, I'm running it through PowerShell scripts, I'm running it through anything native to, and obviously I'm doing most of this through Windows. I'm turning the cloud off, I'm turning the cloud on, I'm running the mutated files. Mike, keep going. Again, you can use your same, this spreadsheet's a little bit different. So because we're turning everything on, a lot of these products have that pre-execution functionality turned on. So when I tested this, the sample set that you're going to see in the next set of statistics is about 5,000 samples. And so what we're seeing is how many got caught and quarantined through the pre-execution, and then when I start detonating, how many get quarantined, how much gets killed, and how much gets stopped versus undetected. Mike? Right. So this is the first sample set using 5,000 original pieces of malware. Apologies that it looks a bit like Pac-Man, but this is what I would expect it to look like. So in that first box over there, the green part is what got quarantined, and then I expand the grey part, which is what I actually had to detonate, and they all did a pretty good job. There was a couple of pups that got executed. Nothing really fancy. However, when I mutated it, things look different. So, let me have a look at this. B and D are our traditional AV products. With these two products, when I was detonating the malware, slow, really slow. What took one of the next-gen AV products 1 hour took one of these products 8 to 9 hours to complete. Now, I know that throwing 5,000 pieces of malware at a box is not reality, and I got slammed a lot for doing that. But, you know, hey, we've got a pretty smart forensic guy that works with Mike and I. Who's to say tomorrow he's just not going to leave a bomb? You know, leave 5,000 pieces and boom, off it goes. The point is that I'm testing performance. I'm testing it sequentially. I'm not testing them all together. The results were just amazing. So with the traditional ones, I saw huge performance issues. With A, D, and B, with those 5,000, when the quarantine pieces were gone and then I was left with the remaining pieces, remember I've double mutated the malware here. A lot of them struggled to get through those 5,000 samples. So there were like maybe 10 or 15 pieces and it just could not complete it. So when you're seeing that the samples could not be executed, it's not that they couldn't run them all. There was just some pieces of malware in those 5,000 samples that it just could not get through. Now here's the catch. We're meant to be machine learning. We're meant to be picking up, you know, indicators of compromise and indicators of attack or whatever. I reran these scenarios 3 times over 3 separate weeks. Now in the original pieces, one of the vendors learnt pretty well. With the mutated pieces, in particular A, B, and E, not one of them learnt. Not one of them, when I replicated this, my triple mutated malware samples, they all did the same thing. They all did the same thing. And I got into a lot of conflict with some of the vendors with some of this. But they understood what I was trying to do. So here's another demo that I want to show you. Again, this is a vendor with all the capabilities turned on. I have not done anything to tweak their environment whatsoever. It is configured exactly how they told me to configure it. My box is 100% patched. All I'm showing you here is, again, that same sample set of 100 samples of malware, double mutated. And I'm just running it on a for loop on the command line. Nothing fancy. Now, you can see that there's a little pink time bomb, I suppose, just in the process hacker there, and I named it MNO because I wanted to track it. And that's a piece of ransomware. And what's happening is right now it's executing. And unfortunately, I can't show you, but because I don't want to discredit any of the vendors here. But when I went to their console and I searched for this process, nowhere to be seen. So I want to do detection on this. I want to be able to do some process tracking and triage. Nowhere to be found. And then eventually what happens with these 100 pieces of malware, you'll see that ransomware pop up. And then in a minute, and we're almost at the end.
It'll be here in a second.
Yep.
It'll be here. So just wait for it.
Yeah, that's fine. Boom, there it is there. Eventually the next one's going to come up.
Yeah, just to let everyone know, these videos were compressed a little bit, so this would really be over about a 6 to 7 minute time period.
Yeah, this was a 7-minute time period.
If you want to keep explaining what you did here.
Yeah. So all I'm checking is I'm just checking the files. I'm just seeing if anything's been encrypted. I'm just basically checking the status of the processes, any of the C2 calls, etc., etc. But the point here is that I've just got a bunch of 100 samples, which I double ransomwared, nothing fancy, double ransomwared 3 of the vendors, 3 of the solutions that I was testing in my POC, 3, by double mutating a whole bunch of samples. Not hard to do, not hard to do. And again, I tested each of these solutions 3 times over a 3-week period, same results. So, what are some of the hype? Some of the lies and damn lies? Don't just point and click and execute your malware just because it's fun. Make sure you use different techniques, different strategies. I know it's hard, but coming into this, I knew nothing about PowerShell. I hadn't written a batch script in years. There's so many resources available to you. If an attacker or a serious advanced APT wants to get into your network, they are not going to use a binary. Whoa, okay. They're not going to use a binary, and they're going to use different methods to make sure that they can exfiltrate your network. Now, we're running out of time, so I'm going to move it up a little bit. So let's talk about targeted attacks. A targeted attack is obviously where we're looking at a spearfish or something like that. So in this scenario, I've got my Kali system, I've got my victim, and you can... What I wanted to do with this particular test was I wanted to test some of the older style malware, not the new ones. And again, I'm trying to obfuscate the malware. I don't want to use binaries. And in this particular scenario that I'm actually doing, I'm using a piece of fileless malware. So let's talk about fileless malware. Fileless malware, I absolutely hate the term. I hate the hype word. I was using an example a little while ago as a joke. 10, 15 years ago, we had poison ivy. That was fileless malware, okay? We haven't evolved. Nothing's changed. It's still there. At the end of the day, there is still a trace to disk. When an attacker is gaining persistence and they're writing a registry key, guess what? There's a bit of evidence. There's nothing that is truly fileless. Okay, so this is one of the solutions that I tested, and I used a really old MS exploit against a vulnerable browser. Here I've got my Kali Linux, I'm just loading up my payload, and I'm executing, I'm setting up the MS1103 exploit. Over on the other side, when we go over there, I have a fully protected endpoint, and there it is there. Here's a user, I'm still a user, I've got my URL, I'm going to click on it, boom, I've been phished. You can see now I've just gained reverse shell into my user. Well, not quite yet. Here we go, I connect to the session. There I am. Going to reverse shell and bring up Notepad. Now, this is actually a simulation because I've actually got the screen snapshots of this. So apologies that it's not 100% authentic, but again, I can show anyone the authenticity if anyone wants to question me on that. I did not get detected. I did not get detected, and that's a real problem. Some of you might argue and say, well, you didn't really do anything, right? So a true vendor will say, we're looking for indicators of attack. So we need to talk about indicators of attack versus indicators of compromise if I've got time. But some of these solutions, they, if you're just firing up Notepad, and I did a lot more than that, when you start doing Nmap scan, if you're just going to fire up Notepad, you may not get detected. It's when you start doing something malicious that it's going to detect you and it's going to try to stop you. So, again, hype summary. What have we got? So some of the things that I noticed is some of the EDR solutions are great, but as an organisation, you have got to be ready. Do you have the resources and the people on board to be doing that triage? And you really need to take that into consideration because especially the EDR products, there's so much data and so much stuff. And some of them have got SOC functionality and they may help you, but you still need to make sure that you've got experienced IR people that know what they're doing. Some vendors may tell you, hey, we've got great threat intelligence. If you speak to me about threat intelligence, I'm going to not tell you that threat intelligence works, right? We were writing Snort, we were implementing Snorts 20 years ago, and the threat intelligence that we were doing was static files with IP addresses in there. What's changed? Tell me what's changed. The other day when we got hit with a ransomware attack, our web endpoint protections, our web filtering solution categorized it 2 hours late. It was 2 hours late. So tell me where the benefit is in threat intelligence. I just don't see it right now. So from what I saw, ultimately, a well-funded adversary is going to get in if they really, really, really want to get in. Talk about that.
So at the end of the day, you've tested all this stuff, you're trying to make a decision. What you need to do is you need to put together some type of decision analysis or decision matrix. In this case, what we took our values were, we had certain hardcore must requirements up in the top left, and then we had certain, essentially the wants. We basically went through and ranked functional testing, non-functional testing, all the way down to financial expenses, because for us, the financial piece of this was still an important thing. If you're going to go buy, 30,000 pieces of a software, it's gonna make a difference between, $25 and $30. So when it comes to decision analysis, it's also critical to make sure that your testing is solid, make sure that you've recorded your testing throughout the whole way. As Lidia made mention earlier, what we figured out with our first, kind of feedback session with the vendor was we had to go back and actually record sessions, simply because we had vendor A coming back and telling us, no, that's never going to happen. I don't believe you. And we basically got into arguments with salespeople and engineers saying, that's not how you execute malware. Which I came back with the smart ass, kind of response of, well, I don't know. You explain to me exactly how hard it is to detonate malware. Do I double click, or is it, something much more magical than that? So real quickly here in summary, I know that Lidia has a couple things to say, and then I'll say some.
So I guess in summary, I saw a lot of good machine learning happening. I really did. It's not all doom and gloom. My point is that there's nothing out there to help us. As a community of security professionals, there is nothing out there. And I've written a whole framework. So if you are really struggling to figure out how to test it yourself, definitely reach out. The vendors have got some great advice, but even they will tell you, trust us, but verify. And that's the part that's missing. There's nothing out there to help us. The point is that I've noticed there is no silver bullet. Even myself, who came into this fresh, I had no experience on endpoint security protection. I'm just a naturally curious person, and I just pushed until I found a way. And that's why I've got scripts, I've got batch files, I've got PowerShell files, you name it. I've got about 100 different variations on how to do some of this stuff. And as mentioned, this is 10% of what I did. So there is absolutely no substitute for defense in depth. I know people are sick and tired of hearing it, but I guarantee that there are other, let's not even talk about security controls, but infrastructure controls that you could put in place today that could help some of this stuff. How many of you guys that still don't segment your network? We're not even going to talk about that. I'm not even going to talk about patching, but you absolutely need to test this stuff for yourself. Don't listen to all the marketing hype. There is a lot of hype out there. You absolutely need to go and test it for yourself. There is no silver bullet.
So real quickly here, we do want to thank EFF for their help. We want to thank a couple people on our forensics teams for helping us out when we were going through this journey. We also want to thank the vendors. We had 5 vendors who stepped up to the plate. They helped us out. We had 3 vendors who walked out because of the fact that when we told them what we were going to test about, they literally did a 180 within the next 24 to 36 hours and decided not to test with us. We also want to thank our families for all the help that they did while we were going through and basically detonating 50,000 pieces of malware. So at this point, let's go ahead and let's jump right into questions. Also, if you could, just go ahead and go up to a mic.
Could you go into a little bit more about how you actually did the mutation?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So the mutation can actually be done various ways. I did it a couple of ways. I actually wrote a PowerShell script, and I'm happy to share that with you if you like. I wrote a PowerShell script that literally just added a byte to the end of it, and it just changed the hash value. And there's a couple of other type of compressor type programs that you can use that will change the hash value as well. But there's lots of different ways that you can do it. So happy to share that with you if you need to.
Are we out of time?
We're
We're at 0. Okay, if anybody does have any more questions,
come up and talk to us.
Thank you.